So you don't only break down glucose, you can also break down proteins and fats. So that's also used as energy source. So these molecules enter energy extracting pathway to produce ATP. You never, so if you're trying to diet, try to lose weight, you can go on low carb diet, but you can never go on zero carb diet. And the reason for that is your brain, it only uses glucose as food, so or energy extracting pathway. So your brain needs glucose. If you go on a zero carb diet, that's not good at all, because then your brain's not going to have any glucose unless there's a lot stored in the liver. But once you run out, you need to eat some carbs. So your body not only breaks down sugar, also breaks down proteins and fats. This was aerobic respiration. 3 steps: glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain. Glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. Krebs cycle happens in the matrix. Electron transport chain happens in the inner membrane of mitochondria. Proteins are broken down into amino acids, and fats are broken down into fatty acids and glycerol. If you remember, when we went over chapter 2, we talked about how fats are made of glycerol head and fatty acid tails. So this chapter is kind of taking your knowledge for last 5 chapters and putting it together. So we learned about covalent bonds, the electron carriers. So these electron carriers have covalent bonds formed with the hydrogen. That's how they're keeping the electrons there. We learned about high concentration versus low concentration, and the plasma membrane, how it keeps things out, and it needs ATP synthase if it needs to go out some of the protons. So this chapter is basically taking all your knowledge and putting it together. And it's a lot of memorization. So sometimes, you might think, where I need this knowledge, if my job's, they're going to require me to know these things. They won't. The thing that comes from, basically learning all these things is your grades, and that's your recommendation there. So that's going to tell how, responsible you are, how mature you are, if you're able to follow steps. So this is going to give you that recommendation if you're able to follow steps, if you're responsible to do all the assignments, and that's going to give you a grade. I had a friend who went in for interview. I think she was pre-med for, I don't know, I think it was for a job. So she had all A's, but she got 1C. And you would think they would let that go, but they asked her, like, what happened there? Why do you have a C there? So they do look at those, when you apply for jobs, and they kind of, from that, what they understand is what your recommendation is, how responsible you are. Maybe sometimes something happens during the semester, you can't make it to an A during that semester, but they do look at that. So I wanted to let you guys know. So you're not going to use this in everyday life, but this will come out to your grade, and that's basically your recommendation. So we talked about aerobic respiration. What if there's no oxygen? So, when you work out really fast, and you're not able to, that creates an oxygen debt. So your body is not able to deliver as much oxygen that's needed by the muscles. Then you start feeling that burn. I don't know, like maybe try, working out really fast. You're gonna start burning. And that's when your body's going on anaerobic respiration. Basically, you don't have enough oxygen to go into Krebs cycle. It starts doing fermentation. In us or animals, it's gonna produce lactic acid as a byproduct, and yeast, it's gonna produce alcohol. So the soreness that you get, they did some research. They said it's coming from lactic acid, the burning, and then the soreness also comes from the muscle fibers breaking down when you work out. So glycolysis does not require oxygen. If there's no oxygen, then it's not going to go into Krebs cycle. It's going to go into fermentation. If there is oxygen, it's going to go into Krebs cycle. Anaerobic respiration produces a lot less ATP. It only produces 2 ATP. Here you get 34, 36, or 38 or more. So there's that number that keeps changing. And then it's going to go into fermentation. If you're a bacteria, you're going to produce CO2 as a byproduct, and you're going to produce alcohol if this is happening for a long time. And if you're animal or human, you're going to produce lactic acid. If we produce alcohol, you would get drunk when working out. So we don't produce alcohol, we produce lactic acid. This is an experiment we would have done in the lab. This was supposed to show you rising bread. It's not, I don't know, the animation didn't work. But anyway, so in the lab, you would have yeast and you would add water and sugar to this beaker. And then you put a balloon on top. Here, you still have yeast and water, but you didn't add any sugar. So because we said, when we're going back, that yeast produces CO2 as a byproduct, you can see this balloon filled up with that gas. Here, there's no gas because there's no fermentation happening because there's no sugar in there. So this is an experiment we would have done in the lab. And then as you increase the amount, I guess you produce more of CO2. And then here, it's the same experiment done in the test tube here. In the kitchen, where you see this is the bread rising. You add some yeast to it and the bread rises, but you don't let it go for a very long time. So it doesn't produce CO2 or a lot of alcohol. Even if it does produce some alcohol, it's gonna evaporate when you do the baking. So that's where you use yeast. It's gonna produce alcohol and CO2 as a byproduct. And then we produce lactic acid when we do fermentation. So organisms produce ATP in the absence of oxygen as well. So that's when they do fermentations, anaerobic respiration, but they produce very, less amount compared to aerobic respiration. They only produce 2. Glycolysis produces ATP, does not require oxygen, and it uses another way that's called fermentation. So what's happening during fermentation? It's basically rearranging some things and it's making the NADH during fermentation, and it's recycling that into NAD plus so the glycolysis can happen again. So again, this is yeast and bacteria. This is us, humans. We make lactic acid, like I said. So like I said, if there is, if we produced alcohol, we fermented alcohol while working out, you would get drunk. So you don't produce alcohol, yeast and bacteria do. We produce lactic acid. That's also the same process. It's going to try to recycle the NADHs and then try to do the whole glycolysis process again. So in alcohol fermentation, NADH reduces pyruvate to ethanol. NAD plus is recreated. This is just showing you that NADH is getting recycled and this is being produced again, so it can go back in the glycolysis and being used again. In lactic acid fermentation, NADH reduces pyruvate to lactic acid. NADH plus is recreated. During fermentation, oxidation of glucose molecule yields only 2 ATP. This is just to tell you that it only gives you 2 ATP, whereas aerobic respiration gives you a lot more. And then I just want to make sure you guys still remember oxidation and reduction, because we use that word a lot today. You guys remember what oxidation and reduction means? Also known as redox reactions, if you're taking chemistry right now. So there's gain of electrons and there's loss of electrons. You guys remember which one is which?
Oxidation is the loss.
And the reduction is gain. Last question. What is the main advantage of fermentation over aerobic cellular respiration?